Nothing terrible happened that day. No argument, no goodbye, no moment anyone would point to later and say, this was it. And yet, something ended. There are endings that announce themselves loudly. They arrive with noise, conflict, collapse. This wasn't one of them. Life simply continued, exactly as it had the day before. Morning arrived. The room looked the same. The plans for the day were ordinary, reasonable, safe. And that's why it didn't feel important. There was no reason to stop, no reason to question anything, no reason to feel afraid. People often imagine that lives change when something goes wrong. But most lives don't change, because nothing ever does. There was always more time. Enough time to think about it later. Enough time to decide when things felt clear. Enough time to wait. Waiting felt responsible, careful, mature. After all, nothing was being lost. At least, not visibly. Days passed without friction. Weeks folded neatly into months, and months into years. Each one uneventful enough to justify the next. Not now became a quiet habit. Later sounded reasonable. Someday felt comforting. And life, strangely cooperative, never objected. There were small moments, insignificant on their own. A conversation that could have gone deeper, but didn't. An idea written down, then forgotten. An invitation postponed without explanation. Nothing dramatic, nothing worth remembering. That's the danger. Because when nothing hurts, nothing demands attention. Life didn't collapse. It stabilized. And stability can feel like success, until you realize how little it asks of you. No one warns you about this version of losing, because it looks like a normal life. From the outside, everything seemed fine, predictable, respectable. But beneath that calm surface, something subtle was happening. Not decay, not failure, erosion. So slow it went unnoticed. So quiet it felt harmless. And by the time the question finally appeared, it didn't arrive as panic. It arrived as curiosity. How did I end up here? The strange thing about erosion is that it never announces itself. It doesn't arrive with urgency. It doesn't ask permission. It just keeps going. Every so often, there was a moment that could have mattered. A pause in a conversation. A thought that lingered a second longer than usual. A quiet sense that something was being delayed. Again. But delay felt harmless. After all, nothing bad happened when the decision was postponed. The world didn't punish hesitation. Life kept moving smoothly, as if agreeing with the choice. That's how waiting becomes invisible. Days were filled with reasonable routines, things that made sense, things that looked productive from the outside. There was work to be done, responsibilities to manage, small goals that could be checked off and forgotten. Progress was happening, just not in the direction that mattered. It felt like control. It felt like patience. It felt like maturity. And because it felt right, it went unquestioned. Sometimes the thought would return quietly. I should probably do something about this, but there was never a clear answer to what that something was. And without clarity, waiting seemed wise. So the moment passed. Again. Time, patient and unbothered, continued its work. Birthdays arrived without ceremony. Years were marked by changes that didn't feel significant enough to reflect on. Each one similar enough to the last to feel familiar, comforting. Nothing was wrong. That was the problem. Occasionally, someone else's life crossed the path, briefly. A person who had chosen early, or chosen recklessly, or chosen without permission. Their lives looked messier, less stable, harder to explain, and for a moment there was comparison. But comparison was quickly dismissed. They took risks. They were lucky. That path isn't for me. And just like that, the door closed again, quietly, politely. Time never argues. It never convinces. It simply accepts whatever you give it. And what it was being given was silence. The days kept adding up, not dramatically, just steadily, until one day something shifted. Not externally, nothing visible changed. But a question surfaced, small, inconvenient, impossible to ignore. If nothing is stopping me, why haven't I moved? There was no answer. Only the unsettling realization that the choice had been made many times already. Not by action, but by inaction. And that was when the weight of all those harmless delays began to be felt. Not as regret. Not yet. As awareness. It didn't happen on an important day. That's what made it difficult to notice. No milestone, no crisis, no sudden loss that demanded attention. Just an ordinary moment, the kind that usually disappears without leaving a mark. Someone spoke casually. Not to impress, not to accuse. They weren't even talking to him. "I didn't wait," the voice said. "I was scared, but I moved anyway." The sentence landed softly, almost apologetically, and yet something inside shifted. It wasn't envy. It wasn't regret. It was recognition. For the first time, the thought appeared fully formed, not as a fear, but as a statement. Nothing has been stopping me. The realization felt uncomfortable because it offered no escape. No one else could be blamed. No circumstances could be pointed to. There was no single mistake to undo. No dramatic moment to rewrite. Only a pattern. Years of choosing what felt reasonable. Years of avoiding what felt unclear. Years of mistaking delay for wisdom. Waiting had never been neutral. It had always been a decision. That understanding didn't arrive with panic. It arrived with calm. A dangerous kind of calm. Because once you see it, you can't pretend you don't. Memories began rearranging themselves. Moments that once felt random now formed a line. Conversations once forgotten suddenly felt unfinished. Opportunities once dismissed resurfaced with a strange weight. Not because they were perfect, but because they had been possible. He realized something else then, something quieter, more unsettling. Time hadn't taken anything from him. He had handed it over, slowly, politely, one delay at a time. Life hadn't demanded urgency. It had accepted hesitation, and in doing so, it had quietly chosen a direction he never consciously picked. That was the moment the past became heavy, not with regret. Regret implies a clear mistake. This was different. This was the weight of realizing that nothing had gone wrong, and that was exactly why nothing had changed. The present suddenly felt fragile, not because it was falling apart, but because it was settled, stable, predictable, already shaped by years of silent decisions. And the future no longer felt open. It felt negotiated, as if time itself had been slowly narrowing the options, not out of cruelty, but out of habit. If I don't move now, the thought surfaced, then this becomes permanent. That was the first moment fear appeared. Not fear of failure. Fear of continuity. Fear that the next years would look exactly like the last, not because they had to, but because they were allowed to. There was no dramatic choice to make in that moment, no clear action to take, only awareness. And awareness, once it arrives, is difficult to carry, because it doesn't tell you what to do. It only shows you what you've been doing all along. Awareness doesn't arrive with instructions. It never tells you what to fix first. It only lingers. The days continued after that moment. They had to. Morning still arrived. Routines still demanded attention. Life, unchanged on the surface, carried on as if nothing had happened. But something had. Every familiar action now carried a quiet weight. Each small choice felt slightly louder than before, because once you notice the pattern, you begin to see it everywhere. In the pauses between conversations, in the things left unsaid, in the decisions deferred just one more time. Nothing felt urgent enough to force movement, and yet everything felt heavier. He began to understand something most people never articulate. The most permanent decisions are often the ones we never realize we're making. There was no clear line between past and present, no moment where everything suddenly made sense, just a slow recognition that life had been shaped not by bold actions, but by the quiet absence of them. The future still existed, technically, but it no longer felt infinite. It felt conditional, dependent on whether awareness would turn into motion or dissolve back into comfort. That question remained unanswered, not because it couldn't be answered, but because answering it would require disruption. And disruption is uncomfortable. Stability, after all, is persuasive. It asks very little, it rewards consistency, and it makes no demands for courage. That's why so many people remain where they are, not trapped, not defeated, just still. Time doesn't rush them. It doesn't threaten. It waits, patient, neutral, unconcerned. And in that patience, choices continue to be made quietly, not in moments of drama, but in moments of delay. So the question never becomes what went wrong. It becomes something far more unsettling. At what point did I stop choosing and start allowing? There is no answer offered here, only the awareness that the moment you notice this pattern, you are already standing inside it, and whether anything changes next is not a matter of time. It never was.